I stared at the custom dinner box in my hands, the bold red letters screaming, "Special dietary needs," while everyone else received elegant gold labels with their names beautifully scripted. My mother-in-law Diana stood there with that sickeningly sweet smile, her manicured fingers adjusting her pearl necklace as she purred, "Yours is special, dear. You've always been so sensitive." The humiliation burned through my chest as Marcus's entire family watched this carefully orchestrated moment. Diana had planned this public embarrassment down to the last detail, and I knew this wasn't about dietary restrictions at all. 2 years of marriage to Marcus had taught me many things, but understanding his mother, Diana Patterson, wasn't one of them. She remained an enigma wrapped in designer clothing and passive-aggressive comments that left me questioning my own sanity. During our engagement, Diana had been the picture of maternal warmth. She'd take me shopping for wedding decorations, offer unsolicited advice about flower arrangements, and constantly remind me how lucky Marcus was to have found someone so grounded. Back then, I believed her genuine affection was real. The shift happened 3 weeks after our honeymoon in Costa Rica. Marcus and I returned tanned and happy, ready to start our life together in our modest apartment near downtown Portland. Diana invited us for Sunday dinner, and I brought homemade apple pie as a peace offering. She took one bite, wrinkled her nose, and declared, "Well, it's certainly rustic. Marcus has always preferred store-bought desserts anyway." That comment planted the first seed of doubt, but I dismissed it as perfectionist tendencies. Diana came from old money-inherited wealth that bought her a sprawling estate in the hills overlooking the city. Her late husband had built a real estate empire, and she maintained that legacy through shrewd business decisions and social connections that spanned 3 generations of Portland's elite families. My background couldn't have been more different. I grew up in a middle-class household where my parents worked double shifts to afford my college education. Dad drove delivery trucks for 23 years, while Mom cleaned office buildings at night. They taught me the value of hard work, genuine kindness, and treating people with respect, regardless of their bank account balance. Teaching 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary didn't exactly scream financial success, but I loved helping kids discover their potential. My annual salary of $38,000 barely covered student loans and basic expenses, but I found purpose in those bright young faces every morning. Marcus, on the other hand, worked as a financial analyst for a prestigious investment firm downtown. His income easily tripled mine, though he never made me feel inadequate about the difference. At least not until his mother started pointing it out during family gatherings. The incidents began small and seemingly innocent. Diana would accidentally prepare meals containing ingredients I was allergic to, then act shocked when I couldn't eat them. She'd exclude me from family photos, claiming she forgot I was there. During conversations about vacation plans or family traditions, she'd speak as if I weren't sitting right beside her. "Marcus should really consider taking that ski trip to Aspen this winter," she'd announce during dinner. "He's always loved the slopes there. Of course, some people aren't comfortable with winter sports." I'd mentioned once that I'd never learned to ski, having grown up without the luxury of expensive mountain vacations. Diana apparently filed that information away for future ammunition. Tonight's dinner box contained the blandest collection of food I'd ever seen. Plain boiled chicken breast, steamed vegetables without seasoning, and white rice that looked like it had been prepared for someone recovering from stomach surgery. Meanwhile, everyone else received gourmet meals with herb-crusted salmon-roasted root vegetables and wild rice pilaf that smelled absolutely divine. Mom, this looks incredible," Marcus said, opening his elegantly labeled container. "You've really outdone yourself." Diana beamed at her son's praise while I stared at my institutional-looking meal. The contrast couldn't have been more deliberate or humiliating. "Greta has such specific dietary needs," Diana explained to the gathered family members. I wanted to make sure she felt comfortable and safe eating something that wouldn't upset her delicate system. Jake Marcus's younger brother looked confused. I didn't know Greta had food restrictions. She seemed fine eating everything at our barbecue last month. Oh, you'd be surprised what people hide, Diana replied with that practiced smile. Some individuals are just more sensitive than others. It's not their fault, of course. The way she emphasized sensitive made my skin crawl. She wasn't talking about food allergies, and everyone in the room understood the real meaning behind her carefully chosen words. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table, misreading my silence as gratitude. It's really thoughtful of you to be so considerate, Mom. Greta appreciates the extra effort. I wanted to scream that I didn't need special accommodations, that my only food allergies were to shellfish and tree nuts, neither of which were present in anyone else's meals. Instead, I smiled politely and picked at the flavorless chicken. After dinner, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen while I helped clear plates. You seem quiet tonight. Everything okay? Your mother has been telling people I have eating disorders and health issues, I said, carefully testing the waters. He frowned, genuinely confused. What makes you think that she's always been concerned about everyone's well-being? That's just how she shows love. Marcus, she made me a special meal because of my supposed dietary restrictions. I don't have dietary restrictions beyond avoiding shellfish and nuts. Maybe she was just being cautious. You did mention feeling sick after that restaurant meal 2 weeks ago. I'd gotten food poisoning from bad fish at a seafood place. Any reasonable person would have connected that to the restaurant's poor food handling, not my supposed digestive sensitivity. She's deliberately trying to make me look problematic in front of your family, I continued. Marcus sighed and rubbed his temples. Greta, I think you're reading too much into this. Mom has been nothing but welcoming since day one. She paid for half our wedding, remember. She's trying to help. The conversation was going nowhere, and I realized how carefully Diana had constructed this narrative. To Marcus, she appeared caring and attentive. To everyone else, I looked like an ungrateful daughter-in-law who couldn't appreciate her mother-in-law's thoughtful gestures. As we prepared to leave, Diana appeared with a concerned expression that I was learning to recognize as her signature manipulation face. Greta, dear, I hope the meal agreed with you. I know how important it is to maintain proper nutrition when someone has your particular challenges. What challenges would those be? I asked directly. Oh, you know, she waved her hand dismissively. The sensitivities we discussed. Your delicate constitution. Marcus mentioned you've been under quite a bit of stress lately with work and adjusting to married life. I turned to look at Marcus, who had the grace to appear slightly uncomfortable. When had he discussed my stress levels with his mother? And why had she interpreted normal life adjustments as evidence of a delicate constitution? That night, lying in bed beside my sleeping husband, I stared at the ceiling and realized Diana Patterson was playing a much more sophisticated game than I'd originally understood. She wasn't just being difficult or controlling. She was systematically building a case against me using my own words and reactions as evidence that I was somehow unfit for her precious son. The truly terrifying part was how subtle and believable she made it all seem. To casual observers, she appeared to be a caring mother-in-law, going above and beyond to accommodate her son's challenging wife. The special dinner box wasn't cruelty, it was kindness. The exclusion from conversations wasn't rudeness, it was sensitivity to my obvious discomfort. The constant comments about my background weren't snobbery, they were gentle concerns about compatibility. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. I needed to start paying closer attention to Diana's methods because something told me tonight's humiliation was just the beginning of a much larger campaign designed to drive me away from Marcus forever. 3 days after the dinner box incident, I was grading papers at my desk during lunch break when Ashley Marcus's 24-year-old cousin appeared in my classroom doorway. Her usually cheerful demeanor seemed strained, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if worried someone might overhear our conversation. "Can we talk privately?" she asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Ashley worked in marketing for a tech startup downtown and had always been friendly during family gatherings. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthdays and brought homemade cookies to office meetings genuinely sweet without any hidden agenda. "Of course," I said, setting down my red pen. "Is everything all right?" She pulled up a chair next to my desk and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something about what Aunt Diana has been saying about you, and you're not going to like it." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of things?" Ashley pulled out her phone and scrolled through a series of text messages. "She's been talking to family members at gatherings you didn't attend, and she's been saying some really concerning stuff. Look at this." She handed me the phone, and I read Diana's messages in their extended family group chat. "So worried about Marcus lately. His wife has been showing some troubling signs of instability. Last week she had what I can only describe as an episode during dinner. Very concerning behavior. Greta seems to be isolating Marcus from family activities. She claims to be sick whenever we plan gatherings, but then posts photos of herself out with friends the same day. I hate to say this, but I'm starting to worry she might be after Marcus's trust fund. Her background is so different from ours, and she's been asking a lot of questions about our family's financial arrangements." I felt the blood drain from my face as I continued reading. Diana had painted me as manipulative, unstable, and potentially dangerous to Marcus's well-being. The worst part was how she'd twisted actual events to support her narrative. The episode during dinner she referenced was last month when I'd politely declined dessert because I was full. Diana had insisted I try her homemade chocolate cake, pushing the plate toward me repeatedly until I finally said, "Diana, I appreciate the offer, but I'm really too full to eat another bite." Apparently that constituted unstable behavior. The isolation claim stemmed from 2 family events I'd missed due to legitimate conflicts. The first was a Sunday brunch that coincided with a mandatory teacher training session. The second was a cousin's birthday party scheduled the same day as my own father's retirement celebration 3 hours away. "Ashley, I've never asked about family finances," I said, handing back her phone. "I didn't even know Marcus had a trust fund until after we were married, and I've never inquired about the details." "I know," she replied. "That's why I wanted to warn you. Aunt Diana has been building this narrative for months, and some family members are starting to believe her version of events." "What else has she been saying?" Ashley hesitated, clearly uncomfortable sharing more bad news. "She told everyone you were hospitalized for mental health issues last Christmas when you went to visit your parents. She made it sound like you had some kind of breakdown and Marcus was covering for you. I remembered that Christmas visit vividly. My parents had planned a surprise celebration for my grandmother's 80th birthday, complete with relatives flying in from across the country. It was one of the most joyful weekends I'd experienced in years, filled with laughter, family stories, and homemade pierogies that my grandmother insisted on making despite her arthritis." "She's been telling people I was hospitalized," I asked, incredulous. "Not directly. She's more subtle than that. She'll say things like, 'Poor Greta had such a difficult holiday season. Marcus was so worried about her well-being. I pray she gets the help she needs.'" The implications of Diana's word choices hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't making direct accusations that could be easily disproven. Instead, she was planting seeds of doubt that grew into assumptions and rumors. "There's more," Ashley continued reluctantly. She's been taking screenshots of your social media posts and sharing them with family members, pointing out things she finds concerning. Like that photo you posted of yourself hiking with friends last month. She told everyone it showed you were being reckless and engaging in dangerous behavior without considering how it might affect Marcus. I'd posted a single photo from a perfectly safe hiking trail that dozens of families visit every weekend. The dangerous behavior Diana referenced was apparently my decision to climb on a rock formation for a group picture, something any reasonably athletic adult could do without risk. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because last Sunday when you weren't at dinner, she went too far. She started talking about how she thinks you might need professional intervention, and she's been researching ways to help Marcus recognize the warning signs of an unstable marriage." The room felt like it was spinning. Diana wasn't just spreading gossip or expressing concerns. She was actively campaigning to convince Marcus that I posed some kind of threat to his happiness and safety. Has anyone challenged her version of events? A few people have started asking questions. Uncle Robert mentioned that you seemed perfectly normal when he talked to you at the wedding, and Cousin Janet pointed out that your teaching job requires background checks and psychological evaluations. But Aunt Diana always has explanations ready. Ashley showed me more screenshots where Diana had responded to family members' doubts with statements like, "Mental health issues can develop gradually, and people with unstable personalities often excel at hiding their true nature in professional settings." As I sat there absorbing this information, Diana herself appeared in my classroom doorway. She moved with the confident stride of someone who owned every space she entered her designer handbag, perfectly coordinated with her silk blouse and tailored pants. "Ashley, dear," Diana said with false warmth, "I wondered where you disappeared to. And Greta, what a pleasant surprise to find you both together." The timing couldn't have been coincidental. Diana had somehow known about our conversation, which meant she was monitoring family members' activities more closely than I'd realized. "We were just catching up," Ashley said, standing quickly and gathering her things. "I should head back to work." "Of course, sweetheart. Tell your mother I said hello." After Ashley left, Diana turned her attention to me with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I hope she wasn't sharing any family gossip. Young people can be so dramatic about simple misunderstandings. "What misunderstandings would those be?" I asked, curious to see how she'd respond to a direct question. "Oh, you know how family dynamics can be complicated. Sometimes people misinterpret concern for criticism or mistake genuine care for interference. I'd hate for anyone to give you the wrong impression about my intentions." She was incredibly smooth. I had to give her that. Without directly acknowledging Ashley's revelations, she'd managed to dismiss them as dramatic misinterpretations while positioning herself as the misunderstood party. "Diana, I appreciate your concern for Marcus's well-being, but I think there might be some confusion about my character and intentions." "Confusion." She tilted her head with exaggerated puzzlement. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear." "I've never been hospitalized for mental health issues. I've never asked about family finances, and I've never displayed any unstable behavior during family gatherings." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a brief flash of something harder before the mask slipped back into place. "Of course you haven't, sweetheart. I think you may have misunderstood something Ashley shared with you. Family conversations can be taken out of context so easily." "Then perhaps you could clarify what context would make those statements appropriate." Diana stepped closer to my desk, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Greta, I can see that you're upset, and I understand why these misunderstandings would be distressing. But I think your reaction right now demonstrates exactly the kind of sensitivity that has some family members concerned. It was masterful manipulation. She'd taken my legitimate objection to false rumors and reframed it as evidence supporting those very rumors. According to Diana's logic, defending myself proved that I was unstable, while remaining silent would confirm my guilt through non-denial. "I want what's best for Marcus," she continued. "And sometimes that means having difficult conversations about the people in his life. I hope you can understand that a mother's love requires her to pay attention to potential warning signs." "What warning signs are those?" I pressed. Well, for instance, the way you're confronting me right now. A secure, stable person would simply laugh off family gossip instead of treating it as a personal attack. The fact that you're taking this so seriously suggests there might be some truth to the concerns that have been raised. I sat back in my chair, genuinely amazed by her skill. Diana had created a perfect trap where any response I gave could be twisted into evidence against me. Defend myself too vigorously, and I appeared unstable. Remain calm and dismissive, and I looked callous about legitimate family concerns. "I think this conversation has gone on long enough," I said finally. "Of course, dear. I can see you're becoming agitated, and I certainly don't want to cause you any additional stress. Please know that my door is always open if you ever want to discuss these family concerns in a more productive way." After she left, I sat alone in my classroom trying to process what had just happened. Diana hadn't just been spreading rumors. She'd been conducting a sophisticated psychological campaign designed to isolate me from Marcus's family while simultaneously building a case that I was the problem. The most terrifying part was how plausible she made it all sound. If I were an outside observer hearing Diana's version of events, I might have genuine concerns about Marcus's wife too. She'd taken normal human behaviors and recontextualized them as warning signs, creating a narrative so internally consistent that disputing it made me look defensive and unstable. That evening, I decided to search through my own belongings to see if Diana had been gathering evidence in other ways. What I found in my coat closet made my blood run cold. Hidden behind winter jackets was a package addressed to me from my parents, postmarked 3 weeks earlier. The return address showed it had been sent for my 27th birthday, which Diana apparently intercepted before I could receive it. Inside the package was a beautiful hand-knitted scarf from my grandmother, along with birthday cards from my parents' siblings and childhood friends. My family had been wondering why I hadn't acknowledged their gifts while I'd been hurt, that they seemed to have forgotten my birthday entirely. Diana hadn't just been spreading rumors about me. She'd been actively sabotaging my relationships with my own family, making me appear disconnected and unappreciative, while simultaneously gathering evidence that I lacked strong family support. As I held my grandmother's scarf, still smelling faintly of her favorite lavender soap, I realized Diana Patterson was far more dangerous than I'd initially understood. This wasn't about an overbearing mother-in-law protecting her son. This was about a woman who would destroy anyone she perceived as a threat to her control over Marcus's life. The question was, how far was she willing to go to get rid of me? The discovery of my intercepted birthday gifts launched me into full investigation mode. If Diana was bold enough to steal my mail, what other boundaries had she crossed in her campaign against me? I started with social media, creating a fake account to see what Diana might be posting about our family. What I found made my stomach turn. Under the name Concerned Mother Portland, she'd joined several local community groups and neighborhood forums where she'd been subtly spreading information about a troubled young woman in our area who may need community support. Without ever mentioning my name directly, she'd shared enough identifying details that anyone who knew us could piece together her target. She described a local teacher struggling with emotional instability who was married to a successful young professional and lived in the downtown area near Roosevelt Elementary. Her posts in these groups were carefully crafted to appear compassionate while painting me as potentially dangerous. Has anyone else noticed concerning behavior from some of the younger faculty at local schools? I worry about children being exposed to adults who haven't properly addressed their own emotional traumas. My heart goes out to families dealing with mental health challenges. Sometimes love means having difficult conversations about getting professional help for our troubled relatives. I've been praying for a young woman in our community who seems to be struggling with marriage adjustment issues. Her husband is such a kind soul, and I hope she finds the support she needs. Each post generated sympathetic responses from well-meaning community members who had no idea they were participating in a character assassination campaign. Diana would then engage with these responses, gradually sharing more specific details about my supposed problems while maintaining plausible deniability. Even worse, I discovered she'd been taking screenshots of my own social media posts and sharing them in these groups with her own interpretations attached. A photo of me laughing with teacher colleagues during a weekend barbecue became evidence of my erratic behavior and inappropriate social choices. A picture from my morning jog was presented as proof that I was engaging in compulsive exercise as a coping mechanism. But Diana's digital campaign was just the beginning. I called my principal, Dr. Harrison, under the pretense of checking on some administrative paperwork, and casually mentioned how much I appreciated the school's supportive environment. "Actually, Greta, I'm glad you brought that up," Dr. Harrison said. "I've been meaning to schedule a meeting with you. We received some concerning communications about your well-being, and I wanted to make sure you're getting any support you might need." My blood ran cold. "What kind of communications?" "A family member contacted us expressing worry about stress levels and emotional stability. Of course we take these concerns seriously, especially given your access to students. I want you to know that we're here to help if you're going through any personal difficulties." Dr. Harrison, who contacted the school, "I'm not able to share specific details about confidential communications, but I can tell you that this person seemed genuinely worried about your mental health and felt that professional intervention might be beneficial." Diana had called my workplace. She'd actually contacted my supervisor to express concerns about my psychological fitness to teach children. The audacity was breathtaking, but the effectiveness was undeniable. Now my principal was questioning my stability based on fabricated concerns from someone who wasn't even related to me by blood. "Dr. Harrison, I want to assure you that I'm not experiencing any mental health issues that would affect my teaching ability. I'm happy to undergo any evaluations you feel necessary to put these concerns to rest." "That's good to hear, Greta. Let's schedule a formal meeting next week to discuss this properly. In the meantime, please know that we value you as an educator and want to ensure you have all the resources you need." After hanging up, I felt physically sick. Diana wasn't just attacking my reputation within Marcus's family anymore. She was targeting my professional life, threatening the career I'd worked so hard to build. I needed allies, and I knew exactly where to start. Trevor, Marcus's best friend since college, worked as a corporate lawyer downtown. He was smart, observant, and had always treated me with genuine respect and warmth. If anyone might notice inconsistencies in Diana's narrative, it would be him. I called Trevor and asked if we could meet for coffee, explaining that I had some concerns about family dynamics and valued his perspective as someone who knew Marcus well. He agreed to meet me that afternoon at a quiet cafe near his office. Trevor arrived looking typically professional in his navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, but his expression seemed unusually guarded. As we settled into a corner booth, I realized he might already have been influenced by Diana's campaign. Marcus mentioned you've been having some adjustment challenges with married life, he said carefully. I want you to know I'm here if you need someone to talk to. There it was. Diana had been feeding information to Marcus, who then shared it with his closest friend. The web of manipulation was even wider than I'd imagined. Trevor, what exactly has Marcus told you about these adjustment challenges? He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, Greta, I don't want to get in the middle of family issues, but Marcus has been worried about you lately. His mother has noticed some concerning patterns, and she's been trying to help him understand what he should be watching for. What patterns would those be? Mood swings, social isolation, defensive reactions to normal family interactions. Diana apparently has some background in psychology from her volunteer work, and she's been helping Marcus recognize potential warning signs. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Diana's background in psychology consisted of serving on the board of a local mental health charity, a position she'd obtained through social connections rather than professional expertise. But she'd clearly leveraged that association to present herself as qualified to diagnose my mental state. Trevor, I need to ask you something and I want an honest answer. Has Diana asked you to monitor my behavior during social events? His silence was answer enough, but eventually he nodded reluctantly. She mentioned that it would be helpful if Marcus's friends could provide observations about concerning incidents. She said you might not be aware of how your actions appear to others. And what concerning incidents have you observed? Well, there was that dinner party last month when you seemed withdrawn and barely participated in the conversation. I remembered that evening clearly. Diana had spent the entire dinner discussing luxury vacation destinations and expensive restaurants topics deliberately chosen to highlight the economic differences between my background and theirs. When I'd tried to contribute to the conversation by mentioning a beautiful state park I'd visited with my family, Diana had smiled condescendingly and said, "How quaint. Marcus really should take you somewhere more sophisticated." After that, I'd stopped trying to participate. Trevor, did it occur to you that I might have withdrawn from a conversation that was designed to make me feel excluded? He frowned, considering this perspective for the first time. I hadn't thought about it that way. What else has Diana asked you to watch for? Signs of financial stress or unusual interest in Marcus's inheritance. She's concerned that you might be experiencing pressure related to your different economic backgrounds. This was particularly infuriating because Diana knew perfectly well that Marcus and I kept completely separate finances. I'd insisted on paying my own way for everything from groceries to utilities specifically to avoid any appearance of taking advantage of his financial advantages. Has Marcus ever mentioned me asking about his inheritance or expressing financial stress? No, Trevor admitted. Actually, he's mentioned the opposite. He said you refuse to let him pay for things even when it would be easier. Then why do you think Diana has concerns about my financial motivations? Trevor was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him starting to recognize the inconsistencies in Diana's narrative. I'm beginning to realize I may not have gotten the full story. I pulled out my phone and showed him some of Diana's posts from the community groups. This is what she's been sharing about me online. Does this sound like the behavior of someone genuinely concerned about family well-being? As Trevor read through the posts, his expression shifted from confusion to growing alarm. Greta, this is character assassination. She's not just expressing private family concerns. She's conducting a public campaign against you. There's more, I said, telling him about the intercepted mail, the calls to my school, and the fabricated stories about my supposed hospitalization and unstable episodes. By the end of our conversation, Trevor looked genuinely shaken. I had no idea Diana was going to these lengths. Marcus needs to know about this. I've tried talking to Marcus, but she's done such an effective job building her case that he interprets my objections as evidence supporting her concerns. Then we need irrefutable proof, Trevor said grimly. As a lawyer, I can tell you that Diana's behavior constitutes harassment and potentially fraud if she's creating false documents or making defamatory statements. But we need to document everything carefully. As I walked back to my car after our meeting, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved because I finally had someone who understood the scope of Diana's manipulation, but terrified because I was beginning to realize how far she was willing to go to destroy my marriage. That night, I decided to conduct a thorough search of my own digital presence to see what else Diana might have discovered about me. What I found chilled me to the bone. Someone had been accessing my personal email account reading messages between me and my family friends and colleagues. The login history showed access from an IP address that traced back to Diana's home computer. She'd been monitoring my private communications for months, gathering ammunition for her campaign, while also intercepting important messages before I could receive them. Among the emails she'd accessed were messages from my doctor's office, my bank, my student loan servicer, and even correspondence with my wedding photographer about final payment arrangements. Diana had been building a comprehensive file about my personal life, financial situation, and health information, but the most disturbing discovery was a draft email in my account that I hadn't written. Someone had composed a message to Marcus expressing doubts about our marriage and suggesting that I might need professional help. The draft was saved but never sent, apparently waiting for the right moment to be discovered as evidence of my unstable mental state. Diana wasn't just spreading rumors about me. She was actively creating false evidence to support her claims, manipulating digital records to build an airtight case that I was psychologically unfit to be Marcus's wife. As I stared at that fabricated email draft, I realized Diana Patterson was far more dangerous than a controlling mother-in-law. She was a sophisticated manipulator who would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone she perceived as a threat to her influence over her son. The question was no longer whether she would escalate her campaign. The question was how far she was willing to go and whether I could gather enough evidence to stop her before she succeeded in destroying everything I'd built. I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. Beth, my former college roommate, worked in cybersecurity for a major tech company in Seattle. If anyone could help me trace Diana's digital activities and gather concrete evidence, it would be her. Beth arrived in Portland 2 days later, armed with her laptop and a grim determination that matched my own. She'd always been the friend who solved problems through methodical analysis and technical expertise, the person who could find patterns where others saw only chaos. "Show me everything," she said, settling into my living room with her equipment. Over the next 6 hours, Beth uncovered a digital campaign so sophisticated and extensive that even she seemed impressed by Diana's technical abilities. Using various tools and techniques, we traced Diana's activities across multiple platforms and discovered she'd created at least 12 fake social media accounts each, with carefully constructed backstories and friend networks. "Your mother-in-law has been running what essentially amounts to a professional disinformation campaign," Beth said, showing me spreadsheets of data she'd compiled. "Look at this timeline." The evidence was staggering. Diana had been planning this campaign since before our wedding, creating accounts and establishing credibility in various online communities months in advance. She'd researched social media manipulation techniques, studied community psychology, and developed strategies that would have been impressive if they weren't being used to destroy my life. "She's been leaving negative reviews for restaurants and venues where you work part-time." Beth continued showing me fake Yelp and Google accounts Diana had created. Look at this review for the tutoring center where you taught SAT prep classes last summer. I read the review with growing horror. Unprofessional staff member exhibited concerning behavior around students. Management should review hiring practices and consider additional background screenings for educational roles. The review was subtle enough to avoid legal liability, but damaging enough to raise questions about my professional competence. Diana had posted similar reviews for every place I'd worked, creating a paper trail that suggested multiple employers had concerns about my behavior. Beth, she's trying to destroy my career opportunities. It gets worse, Beth said grimly. She's been monitoring your email for months, but she's also been creating documents using professional letterhead from doctors and therapists. She showed me files Diana had created on her home computer, including fake therapy session notes and medical recommendations. The documents looked completely authentic, complete with proper formatting medical terminology and forged signatures from real healthcare providers in the Portland area. These documents suggest you've been receiving treatment for severe anxiety, depression, and adjustment disorders, Beth explained. She's even created a fake treatment plan recommending marital counseling and psychological evaluation. The sophistication was breathtaking. Diana had researched actual therapists, copied their letterhead, and created medical records that would fool anyone who didn't contact the providers directly to verify authenticity. But this is the most disturbing thing I found, Beth said, pulling up another file. She's been consulting with a lawyer about involuntary psychiatric commitment procedures. My hands started shaking as I read through Diana's research notes about Oregon's mental health laws, commitment procedures, and the legal requirements for having someone declared mentally incompetent. She'd been building a case that would allow her to have me forcibly hospitalized for psychological evaluation. She's been planning to have me committed. The paperwork is partially completed, Beth confirmed. She has affidavits from supposed witnesses, medical documentation, and legal forms ready to file. All she needs is one triggering incident to justify emergency intervention. I felt physically ill understanding how close Diana had come to succeeding. If I'd reacted more dramatically to any of her provocations, if I'd lost my temper during one of our confrontations, she could have used that as evidence to support an emergency psychiatric hold. There's one more thing, Beth said carefully. I found financial records showing she's been paying a private investigator to monitor your activities and gather additional evidence. She showed me bank statements from Diana's account, revealing payments to Phoenix Investigations, a private detective agency in Portland. The invoices detailed surveillance activities, background checks, and behavioral observation reports spanning the past 8 months. She hired professionals to spy on me. According to these records, yes. The investigator has been documenting your daily routines, photographing your activities, and compiling reports about your social interactions and lifestyle choices. The invasion of privacy was beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Diana had been watching me through hired professionals, building a comprehensive file about my personal habits and relationships. But as we dug deeper into the financial records, Beth made another disturbing discovery. Greta, look at where the money for all this is coming from. The bank statement showed that Diana had been withdrawing funds from an account labeled Marcus Patterson Trust Fund. She'd been using her son's inheritance to finance her campaign against his wife. She's embezzling from Marcus to pay for destroying me. According to these records, she's spent over $12,000 in the past 8 months on private investigators, fake document creation, legal consultations, and various other activities related to her campaign against you. The sheer scale of Diana's investment in destroying my marriage was staggering. She'd committed fraud, theft, harassment, and potentially multiple felonies in her determination to eliminate me from Marcus's life. We need to call the police, I said. Not yet, Beth cautioned. We need more direct evidence linking these activities to her personally. Most of what we've found could be dismissed as circumstantial if she has good lawyers. We need her on record admitting to these activities. That's when I remembered the small digital recorder I'd purchased for recording student interviews for my teaching portfolio. If I could get Diana to admit to even a portion of her activities, we'd have the smoking gun we needed. The next family dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday. I decided to wear the recorder and see if I could provoke Diana into revealing her true intentions. It was risky, but I was running out of options. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood as Marcus and I drove to his mother's house. I'd hidden the recorder in my jacket pocket, tested the battery twice, and prepared myself for what might be the most important conversation of my life. Diana greeted us at the door with her usual performance of maternal warmth, but I could see calculation behind her smile. She'd been planning something special for tonight, and I had a feeling it was going to be the culmination of her months-long campaign. During cocktails, she casually mentioned that she'd been researching resources for family members dealing with mental health challenges and had some helpful information she wanted to share with Marcus privately after dinner. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about getting Greta the professional support she clearly needs. Diana said, her voice carrying that practiced tone of concerned authority. "What kind of support?" Marcus asked, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Well, darling, I've been documenting some concerning patterns in her behavior, and I think we need to consider more intensive interventions. Sometimes love means making difficult decisions for someone's own good." I felt my heart racing as Diana began laying the groundwork for what I now realized was her endgame. She'd been building toward this moment for months, and tonight was when she planned to convince Marcus that I needed to be removed from his life for everyone's safety. "I've consulted with professionals who specialize in these situations," she continued, "and they've helped me understand the warning signs we've all been witnessing. Greta's defensive reactions, her social isolation, her inability to accept family support. These are classic symptoms that require immediate attention." As Diana spoke, I realized she was essentially reading from a script she'd prepared, hitting all the key points that would justify the legal action she'd been planning. Every word was carefully chosen to build her case for involuntary commitment. The professionals I've spoken with have recommended a comprehensive evaluation to determine the appropriate level of care. Diana said, her voice taking on an ominous quality. "Sometimes family members resist getting help, but there are legal mechanisms in place to ensure people receive the treatment they need." There it was. Diana was telling Marcus that she'd researched ways to have me forcibly committed for psychological evaluation. The recorder in my pocket was capturing every word of her planned ambush. "Mom, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this conversation," Marcus said, finally showing some resistance to his mother's manipulation. "Darling, I understand this is difficult, but we can't enable Greta's deteriorating condition by pretending everything is fine. I have documentation of concerning behaviors, professional recommendations for treatment, and legal options available if she refuses to seek help voluntarily." She was admitting to everything: the documentation campaign, the professional consultations, and the legal preparations for forced commitment. My hands were shaking, but I managed to keep my expression neutral as Diana essentially confessed to months of harassment and fraud. "What documentation?" I asked quietly. Diana turned to me with that cold smile I'd learned to recognize as her true expression. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't think your concerning behaviors were going unnoticed, did you? I've been very thorough in documenting everything for Marcus's protection." "What behaviors specifically?" Your defensive reactions to family concerns, your inability to maintain appropriate social relationships, your financial instability, and apparent interest in Marcus's inheritance. The professionals I've consulted consider these warning signs of significant psychological dysfunction. She was doubling down, adding even more false accusations to the record. The woman was so confident in her manipulation that she felt comfortable openly discussing her plans in front of the person she was targeting. "And what legal options are you referring to?" I pressed. Diana leaned forward with predatory satisfaction. "Oregon has excellent provisions for family members to seek emergency intervention when someone poses a risk to themselves or others. I've done extensive research into the procedures, and I'm prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to protect this family." Perfect. She just admitted on record to researching involuntary commitment procedures and threatening to use them against me. Combined with the evidence Beth had gathered, we now had proof of harassment, fraud, embezzlement, and criminal threats. "I see," I said calmly. "And you've been planning this intervention for some time." "Months," Diana replied proudly. "I've been working with professionals to build a comprehensive case that demonstrates the urgent need for psychiatric evaluation. Marcus the Führer have all the documentation ready whenever you're prepared to take action." Marcus looked horrified as the full scope of his mother's campaign became clear. "Mom, what exactly are you talking about? What documentation?" "Medical records, behavioral observations, witness statements, financial analysis. Everything needed to demonstrate that Greta requires immediate professional intervention. The legal requirements are quite specific, but I've been very thorough in my preparation." She just confessed to creating fraudulent medical records and conducting financial surveillance. The recording device in my pocket had captured everything we needed to expose her campaign and potentially pursue criminal charges. As Diana continued outlining her plans for my forced commitment, I realized that her confidence had become her downfall. She was so certain of her control over the situation that she'd revealed the full extent of her manipulation and criminal activities. The trap she'd spent months constructing was about to collapse on top of her, and she had no idea that her own words were providing the evidence that would destroy her carefully crafted campaign forever. The drive home from Diana's house was silent except for the sound of rain against our windshield. Marcus stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I could practically see him processing everything he'd heard during dinner, finally understanding the scope of his mother's deception. "She's been planning to have you committed," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "For months," I confirmed. "And that's not even the worst part." I told him about the embezzled funds, the fake medical records, the private investigator, and the systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and career. With each revelation, Marcus looked more devastated, like someone discovering that their entire understanding of reality had been built on lies. "I need to hear that recording," he said when we reached our apartment. We sat on our couch as I played back Diana's confession, watching Marcus's expression shift from disbelief to horror to genuine rage as his mother's voice filled our living room with threats and admissions of fraud. "She used my trust fund to pay for this," he said when the recording finished. "She stole my money to destroy my wife." "Marcus, I need you to understand something important. I'm not going to let this continue, and I'm not going to handle it quietly. Your mother has committed multiple crimes, and I'm prepared to pursue legal action." He nodded grimly. "What do you need me to do?" The next morning, I called Trevor and asked him to meet us at his law office. When we arrived, he took one look at Marcus's face and knew something significant had happened. "I need to officially retain you as legal counsel," I told Trevor. "Diana has crossed several legal lines, and I want to explore both civil and criminal options." Over the next 2 hours, Trevor reviewed all the evidence Beth had compiled, listened to the recorded confession, and examined the fraudulent documents Diana had created. His expression grew increasingly serious as the full scope of her activities became clear. "This is extensive criminal behavior," he said finally. "We're looking at harassment, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and potentially criminal threats. The fake medical records alone constitute multiple felonies. What are our options? Criminally, we file reports with police for the embezzlement and fraud. Civilly, we can pursue restraining orders and damages for harassment and defamation. But first, I want to gather more evidence to make this case absolutely airtight." Trevor helped us develop a strategy for documenting additional evidence while protecting ourselves from further harassment. He also recommended that Marcus immediately freeze access to his trust fund and change all passwords for his financial accounts. "Your mother has been monitoring Greta's email for months," Trevor explained to Marcus. "We have to assume she might also have access to your personal accounts." That afternoon, Marcus discovered that Diana had indeed been accessing his email, monitoring his communications with me and his friends to stay ahead of any potential resistance to her campaign. The invasion of privacy was even more extensive than we'd originally understood. But as we dug deeper into Diana's activities, we uncovered something that changed the entire dynamic of our situation. Ashley contacted me with information that turned Diana's campaign into a much larger scandal than we'd anticipated. "I've been talking to other family members," Ashley said when she called. "It turns out Aunt Diana has been manipulating financial information for years. Uncle Robert has been asking questions about some trust fund distributions that don't match the documentation he has. It appeared that Diana's embezzlement wasn't limited to Marcus's trust fund. She'd been managing financial accounts for several family members, and there were discrepancies in multiple accounts that suggested a pattern of theft spanning several years." "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "Uncle Robert thinks it could be over $100,000 across various family accounts. Aunt Diana has been using her position as financial trustee to cover up the missing funds." This revelation completely changed our strategy. Diana wasn't just a manipulative mother-in-law protecting her territory. She was a criminal who'd been systematically stealing from her own family for years, and her campaign against me was likely motivated by fear that I might discover her financial crimes. Trevor was intrigued by this development. "If Diana has been embezzling from multiple family accounts, that explains the urgency of her campaign against you. She needed to eliminate you before you became integrated enough into the family to notice financial irregularities. We decided to expand our investigation to include Diana's broader financial activities. With permission from other family members, Trevor began reviewing trust fund documentation and account records, looking for evidence of the systematic theft Ashley had uncovered. Meanwhile, Beth returned to Portland with additional equipment to conduct a more thorough digital investigation. What she found exceeded our expectations in terms of both scope and audacity. "She's been running elaborate identity theft schemes," Beth reported. "She's used family members' personal information to open credit accounts, take out loans, and even file false insurance claims. The evidence showed that Diana had been using her access to family financial information to commit identity theft on a massive scale. She'd opened credit cards in relatives' names, taken out personal loans using their information, and even filed fraudulent insurance claims for medical expenses and property damage. The total amount of fraud we can document is approaching $300,000, Beth continued. She's been doing this for at least 5 years using increasingly sophisticated methods to avoid detection." As we compiled this evidence, Diana's campaign against me began to make perfect sense. I represented a threat, not because I was trying to access Marcus's money, but because my presence in the family increased the likelihood that someone would notice the financial discrepancies Diana had been hiding. Her attempts to portray me as financially motivated weren't projection. They were preemptive strikes designed to discredit me before I could expose her own criminal activities. "We need to move carefully," Trevor warned. "Diana is clearly desperate and willing to commit serious crimes to protect herself. If she realizes we're investigating her financial activities, she might escalate to more dangerous tactics." As if summoned by our conversation, Diana called Marcus that evening with what she described as urgent family business that required an immediate meeting. "She knows," Marcus said after hanging up. "Something has spooked her." We decided that Marcus should meet with his mother while wearing a recording device, giving us the opportunity to capture any incriminating statements she might make if she was feeling cornered. The next evening, Marcus sat in his mother's elegant living room, listening to Diana outline her latest strategy for dealing with what she called the Greta problem. What we heard on that recording would have been amusing if it weren't so dangerous. "I've been researching more intensive interventions," Diana told her son. "There are private facilities that specialize in treating delusional individuals who pose risks to their families. The commitment process can be expedited if there's immediate danger." She was escalating to kidnapping. Diana had apparently researched private psychiatric facilities that would accept patients based on family requests without proper legal oversight. Her plan involved having me forcibly transported to one of these facilities where I could be held indefinitely under the guise of treatment. "The beauty of these facilities is that they handle all the paperwork and legal requirements," Diana explained. "Family members don't have to worry about complicated court proceedings or lengthy evaluation processes." Marcus managed to keep his voice steady as he asked questions about her plan, gathering evidence of her intention to commit what amounted to kidnapping and false imprisonment. "The initial commitment period is usually 30 to 60 days. Diana continued, "which gives families time to make more permanent arrangements if necessary." She was planning to have me abducted and imprisoned in a psychiatric facility based on fraudulent documentation. The level of premeditation was staggering, but it also gave us everything we needed to stop her permanently. After Marcus left his mother's house, we immediately contacted Trevor and the police. The recorded evidence of Diana's kidnapping plot, combined with the financial fraud documentation, gave law enforcement everything they needed to take immediate action. "This has moved beyond civil harassment," Detective Rodriguez explained when we met with Portland police the following morning. "We're looking at conspiracy to commit kidnapping, multiple counts of fraud, and organized criminal activity." Within 48 hours, police had obtained warrants to search Diana's house and seize her computer equipment. What they found during that search provided evidence of crimes we hadn't even imagined. Diana had been running an elaborate insurance fraud scheme, filing false claims for accidents and injuries that never occurred. She'd been manipulating medical records to support these claims, working with corrupt healthcare providers to create documentation for non-existent treatments and procedures. She'd also been involved in a real estate fraud scheme, using her position in the industry to manipulate property transactions and pocket funds that should have gone to legitimate buyers and sellers. "Your mother-in-law was essentially running a criminal enterprise," Detective Rodriguez told Marcus. "The harassment campaign against your wife was just one component of a much larger pattern of criminal behavior." As the scope of Diana's criminal activities became clear, I realized how fortunate I'd been to uncover her campaign when I did. If she'd succeeded in having me committed or driven from Marcus's life, she could have continued her criminal activities for years without detection. The woman who'd presented herself as a concerned mother protecting her son was actually a sophisticated criminal who'd been stealing from her own family and community for years. Her campaign against me wasn't about love or protection. It was about preserving a criminal empire built on deception and theft. But Diana Patterson had made one critical mistake in her elaborate schemes. She'd underestimated the determination of a fourth-grade teacher who'd been raised to fight for what was right regardless of the odds or obstacles. The tables had turned, and now Diana was about to discover what it felt like to be the target of a carefully planned campaign designed to expose the truth and deliver justice. The arrest warrant for Diana Patterson was executed on a Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Marcus and I watched from our car as police officers rang the doorbell of the elegant estate where Diana had plotted my destruction for nearly a year. She answered the door in a silk robe and designer slippers, her usual composed demeanor cracking as Detective Rodriguez read her rights and placed handcuffs around her wrists. The woman who'd spent months orchestrating elaborate schemes to control and manipulate others was finally experiencing what it felt like to have her own freedom taken away. "This is ridiculous," Diana protested as officers led her to their patrol car. "I demand to speak with my lawyer immediately. This is all some terrible misunderstanding." Even in handcuffs, she was still trying to control the narrative, presenting herself as the victim of persecution rather than the perpetrator of multiple felonies. But the mountain of evidence we'd compiled made her protest sound hollow and desperate. Marcus sat beside me in stunned silence, watching his mother's arrest with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had been shattered. "She looks so small," he said quietly. Diana did appear diminished without her usual armor of designer clothes and manufactured authority. Stripped of her ability to manipulate and control, she looked exactly like what she was, a frightened criminal who'd finally been caught. The search of Diana's house yielded evidence that exceeded even our expanded expectations. Police found filing cabinets full of fraudulent documents, computer files detailing years of financial crimes, and extensive records of her surveillance and harassment activities targeting not just me, but several other family members who'd questioned her authority over the years. She had detailed profiles on everyone in the family, Detective Rodriguez explained during our follow-up meeting. Anyone she perceived as a potential threat to her control was monitored and documented. You weren't her first target, just her most recent one. Among the evidence seized were recordings Diana had made of private family conversations, photographs taken during covert surveillance of relatives' homes and workplaces, and psychological profiles she'd created to identify vulnerabilities she could exploit. The private investigator she'd hired, James Phoenix, agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed the full scope of Diana's criminal enterprise and her increasing desperation as family members began questioning financial discrepancies. She was convinced that Greta was going to expose her embezzlement, Phoenix told investigators. The entire harassment campaign was designed to discredit your wife before she could discover the missing money or convince other family members to audit the trust fund accounts. Diana's carefully constructed persona as a caring matriarch had been a complete fabrication designed to hide years of theft and manipulation. Every family gathering, every expression of concern, every gesture of generosity had been calculated moves in a long-term strategy to maintain control over family finances while systematically stealing from the people who trusted her. But her greatest mistake was underestimating the intelligence and determination of the woman she'd chosen as her target. Diana had assumed that an elementary school teacher from a middle-class background would be easy to intimidate and dismiss. She'd never considered that I might have the skills and support system necessary to fight back effectively. The trial preparation process revealed additional crimes that expanded the charges against Diana significantly. Financial investigators discovered she'd been manipulating charitable foundation accounts, stealing from the mental health organizations where she'd volunteered, and even embezzling from her late husband's estate before it could be properly distributed to heirs. The total amount of documented theft exceeds $400,000, the prosecutor explained during our pretrial conference. And that's just what we can prove definitively. The actual amount is likely much higher. Trevor helped us navigate the legal complexities of both the criminal prosecution and our civil lawsuit against Diana. The evidence was so overwhelming that her defense attorney recommended she accept a plea agreement rather than risk a trial that would likely result in much harsher sentencing. Diana's lawyer knows she can't win, Trevor explained. The evidence is too comprehensive and the witness testimony too damaging. They're going to try to negotiate the best possible deal. Meanwhile, the family began the difficult process of healing from years of manipulation and financial abuse. Ashley organized family meetings where relatives could share their experiences and compare notes about Diana's behavior patterns. "She always made us feel like we were imagining things," Uncle Robert said during one of these gatherings. "If you questioned her explanations about family finances, she'd make you feel guilty for not trusting her judgment." Cousin Janet nodded in agreement. She was a master at making people doubt their own perceptions. I questioned myself for years about whether her treatment of various family members was really as bad as it seemed. The family had been living under Diana's psychological manipulation for so long that many members had lost confidence in their own ability to recognize inappropriate behavior. Her systematic campaign of gaslighting had affected everyone, not just her primary targets. But as family members compared their experiences and reviewed the evidence of Diana's crimes, a different picture emerged. Diana hadn't been a protective matriarch making difficult decisions for everyone's good. She'd been a predator exploiting family loyalty and trust to build her criminal enterprise. "I feel like I've been living in an elaborate lie for 20 years, Marcus confided during one of our conversations with his therapist. How could I not see what she was doing? Dr. Chen, the family counselor Trevor had recommended, helped Marcus understand that Diana's manipulation tactics were sophisticated enough to fool even trained professionals. Psychological manipulation works precisely because it's designed to be undetectable, she explained. Your mother was skilled at creating situations where questioning her behavior seemed unreasonable or disloyal. The therapeutic process was helping Marcus recognize the patterns of manipulation that had controlled his thinking since childhood. Diana had trained him to dismiss his own perceptions and trust her judgment above all else, making it nearly impossible for him to recognize her criminal behavior. She convinced me that protecting family meant protecting her, Marcus realized. Anytime someone raised concerns about her behavior, she reframed it as an attack on family unity that I needed to defend against. As Marcus worked through years of psychological manipulation in therapy, I dealt with my own recovery process. The trauma of being targeted for destruction by someone who should have been family support had affected me more deeply than I'd initially realized. You experienced a form of psychological warfare, Dr. Chen explained during our joint sessions. The constant threat assessment, the need to document and defend your every action, the isolation from support systems, these create lasting stress responses that require time and professional support to heal. But despite the trauma, I felt an overwhelming sense of vindication as Diana's criminal empire crumbled around her. Every fake document, every manipulated conversation, every attempt to destroy my reputation had been exposed and documented. The woman who'd tried to convince everyone I was unstable and dangerous was now facing years in prison for her own criminal behavior. The preliminary plea negotiations revealed that Diana was facing between 12 and 18 years in federal prison, depending on her level of cooperation with ongoing investigations into her criminal associates. The private psychiatric facility she'd planned to use for my kidnapping was also under investigation for accepting patients without proper legal authority. She built an entire network of criminals and corrupt professionals, Detective Rodriguez explained. Your case helped us uncover a much larger pattern of healthcare fraud and illegal commitment procedures that affected dozens of families. Diana's attempt to destroy my life had inadvertently exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for years, potentially saving other families from experiencing the trauma and manipulation we'd endured. As we waited for Diana's sentencing hearing, Marcus and I focused on rebuilding our marriage and our relationships with family members who'd been manipulated into doubting my character. The process wasn't easy, but it was healing in ways I hadn't expected. I owe you an apology that I'll probably spend the rest of my life trying to make up for, Marcus said one evening as we walked through the downtown Portland neighborhood we'd grown to love. You tried to tell me what was happening, and I chose to believe her lies instead of trusting my own wife. You were trained from childhood to trust her judgment, I replied. Diana spent decades perfecting those manipulation techniques. The important thing is that you finally saw through them. As Diana's sentencing date approached, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the threat was finally neutralized, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also sadness for the family destruction Diana had caused through her selfish choices. The woman who could have been a loving grandmother, a supportive mother-in-law, and a positive force in her family's life had chosen instead to become a criminal who destroyed trust and damaged relationships that might never fully heal. But from the ashes of Diana's manipulation and abuse, our family was building something stronger and more authentic than what had existed before. Relationships based on honesty rather than control, trust rather than fear, and genuine love rather than conditional approval. Diana Patterson had tried to destroy my marriage, my career, and my sanity. Instead, her criminal behavior had exposed the truth about her character and given us the opportunity to build the kind of family we'd always wanted. One where love wasn't contingent on submission and where truth was valued above comfortable lies. 6 months after Diana's arrest, I stood in the courthouse watching her accept a plea agreement that would send her to federal prison for 14 years. She wore an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes, her perfectly styled hair replaced by a regulation ponytail that made her look older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. As the judge read the charges to which Diana was pleading guilty, I felt a profound sense of closure. Wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, conspiracy to commit kidnapping and elder abuse. The list went on for several minutes, each count representing lives she'd damaged and trust she'd betrayed. Do you understand the consequences of this plea agreement, Mrs. Patterson? Judge Morrison asked. Yes, Your Honor, Diana replied, her voice barely audible. And do you accept responsibility for the criminal acts outlined in these charges? There was a long pause before Diana answered. Yes, Your Honor. It was the first time I'd ever heard her admit wrongdoing without qualification or excuse. Standing there in handcuffs facing the destruction of everything she'd built through manipulation and crime, Diana Patterson finally acknowledged the truth about her actions. Marcus squeezed my hand as we listened to the judge outline the terms of Diana's sentence. 14 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Restitution of over $400,000 to the victims of her various fraud schemes. permanent restraining orders preventing her from contacting family members she'd harassed or stalked. The court finds that Mrs. Patterson engaged in sophisticated criminal behavior over an extended period, targeting vulnerable family members and exploiting positions of trust for personal gain, Judge Morrison stated. The psychological trauma inflicted on victims, particularly the systematic harassment of Mrs. Greta Patterson, represents a level of premeditation and malice that requires significant consequences. After the sentencing, we gathered outside the courthouse with family members who'd supported us throughout the legal process. Ashley had tears in her eyes as she hugged me. "I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening sooner," she said. "If we'd recognized the signs earlier, you never would have gone through this alone." "You helped when it mattered most," I replied. "That's what family does." Uncle Robert, who'd lost over $60,000 to Diana's embezzlement schemes, shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Your wife has more courage than the rest of us combined. She fought for this family when we were too afraid to see the truth." The civil lawsuit we'd filed against Diana resulted in additional financial compensation for the harassment and defamation she'd inflicted. Her insurance companies, after discovering the extent of her fraudulent claims, were pursuing their own legal action to recover losses. But the most meaningful victory wasn't financial or legal. It was the restoration of relationships and the establishment of genuine trust within Marcus's family for the first time in decades. Trevor, who'd become not just our lawyer, but a true friend throughout this ordeal, helped us understand the broader impact of our case. Diana's prosecution has led to investigations of similar crimes in other states. Your willingness to fight back has helped law enforcement identify patterns of family financial abuse that often go unreported. The private psychiatric facility Diana had planned to use for my forced commitment was shut down by state authorities after investigations revealed they'd been accepting patients without proper legal authorization. Several families who'd lost relatives to questionable commitments were able to seek justice through information uncovered during Diana's prosecution. Dr. Chen continued working with Marcus and me as we rebuilt our marriage on a foundation of honesty and mutual support. The trauma of Diana's manipulation had actually strengthened our relationship in unexpected ways, teaching us to communicate more directly and trust each other's perceptions. Surviving a campaign of psychological warfare together creates a unique form of intimacy, Dr. Chen explained during one of our sessions. You've learned to protect and advocate for each other under extreme circumstances. Marcus had completed extensive therapy to address the lifelong patterns of manipulation and control he'd experienced growing up with Diana as a mother. Understanding how deeply her influence had shaped his thinking helped him develop healthier responses to conflict and stress. "I spent 30 years learning to doubt my own judgment," he told me one evening. "But watching you fight for truth when everyone else was willing to accept lies taught me what real strength looks like." My career at Roosevelt Elementary not only survived Diana's attempts at sabotage, but flourished as the truth about her harassment campaign became known. Dr. Harrison, my principal, apologized for doubting my stability and implemented new policies to protect staff from false accusations and character assassination. "Your experience has taught us important lessons about how to handle concerns about employee well-being," he explained. "We now require multiple forms of verification before taking action on anonymous complaints." The teaching community rallied around me in ways that restored my faith in human decency. Colleagues who'd heard rumors about my supposed instability apologized for not supporting me more actively. Students and parents who'd been told I was experiencing mental health issues expressed relief that their beloved teacher was healthy and strong. "Mrs. Patterson, you're the best teacher I ever had," 10-year-old Emma told me one afternoon. "I'm glad you're not sick like some people were saying." Children have an instinct for truth that adults often lose, and my students had apparently never believed the stories about my instability. Their continued trust and affection during the darkest period of Diana's campaign had helped sustain me when I doubted my own perceptions. The financial restitution from Diana's plea agreement allowed us to establish a college fund for future children and make a substantial donation to the domestic violence shelter where I'd volunteered during college. Turning Diana's stolen money into resources for helping other abuse victims felt like the perfect form of poetic justice. But the most profound healing came from the relationships we'd rebuilt within Marcus's family. Ashley organized monthly dinners where family members could maintain connections based on genuine affection rather than obligation or fear. "It's like we're learning how to be a real family for the first time," Cousin Janet observed during one of these gatherings. Diana's manipulation kept us all isolated from each other, competing for her approval instead of supporting each other. Uncle Robert nodded in agreement. "I realize now that I barely knew any of you as individuals. Diana controlled all the information flow, so we only saw each other through her interpretations." The family was discovering that removing Diana's influence had revealed personalities and relationships that had been suppressed for years. Without her constant manipulation and control, genuine warmth and mutual support could finally flourish. Marcus and I decided to renew our wedding vows 6 months after Diana's sentencing, surrounded by only people who truly supported our marriage. The ceremony was held in the garden behind Ashley's house, with flowers from Uncle Robert's greenhouse and music performed by Cousin Janet's daughter. "I promise to trust your perceptions and support your truth," Marcus said during our vow exchange, "even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." "I promise to fight for our family's well-being and never accept abuse disguised as love," I replied. As we exchanged rings again, I looked toward the back of the garden where a single figure stood watching from the distance. Diana's sister Margaret had attended despite the family's complicated feelings about her loyalty to Diana throughout the legal proceedings. After the ceremony, Margaret approached us with tears in her eyes. "I owe you both an apology," she said. I knew Diana was capable of manipulation, but I never imagined the scope of her criminal behavior. You saved this family from years of additional abuse. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate had taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I'd discovered reserves of strength and determination I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts even when powerful people tried to convince me I was wrong. Most importantly, I'd learned that fighting for truth isn't cruel or vindictive. It's an act of love for everyone who deserves to live free from manipulation and abuse. Diana Patterson had spent months trying to convince everyone that I was unstable, dangerous, and unfit to be part of their family. Instead, her criminal behavior had proven that I was exactly the kind of person they needed, someone willing to stand up to bullies, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice, even when the odds seemed impossible. As Marcus and I drove home from our vow renewal ceremony, I reflected on how completely our lives had transformed. A year ago, I'd been an isolated target of psychological warfare, questioning my own sanity and fighting for my marriage. Now I was a survivor with a strong support system, a thriving career, and a husband who'd learned to value truth above comfortable lies. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't fought back?" Marcus asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. But I was raised to believe that good people stand up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. My parents taught me that allowing bullies to win only encourages them to target other victims. Diana's imprisonment meant she could no longer hurt innocent family members, but the lessons from her criminal campaign would continue protecting people for years to come. Other families facing similar manipulation would benefit from the legal precedents established by our case. Healthcare workers would be better trained to recognize and report suspected abuse. Financial institutions would implement stronger protections against elder fraud and embezzlement. Most importantly, everyone who'd witnessed Diana's downfall had learned that no one is too powerful or too clever to escape consequences for criminal behavior. Sophisticated manipulation tactics and social connections couldn't protect someone who chose to build their life on lies and theft. As we pulled into our driveway, I felt profound gratitude for the family we'd built through truth and mutual support. We'd learned that genuine love doesn't require anyone to accept abuse in silence, and that the strongest families are those willing to confront uncomfortable realities rather than maintain comfortable lies. Diana Patterson had tried to destroy my life because she saw me as a threat to her criminal enterprise. Instead, her campaign against me had exposed her true character and given our family the opportunity to build relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Sometimes the people who claim to protect family are the ones we most need protection from. True love doesn't require you to endure abuse in silence, and fighting back against manipulation isn't cruel. It's necessary for healing. The strongest families are built on truth, not comfortable lies, and sometimes saving a family means being willing to lose the people who are destroying it from within. If you've experienced similar manipulation or abuse within your family, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not crazy. Trust your instincts. Document everything, and don't be afraid to seek help from professionals who understand psychological manipulation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior, even when that someone is family. What would you do if someone you trusted was systematically trying to destroy your reputation and relationships? Have you ever experienced family manipulation that made you question your own perceptions? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to fight back against abuse. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your truth matters. Your perceptions are valid, and you deserve relationships built on respect and genuine love.